Pandas Crosstab. So you can think of Crosstab as pretty much the same thing as a pivot table. It's going to be exactly the same. In fact, Crosstab actually uses Pandas Pivot Table within its source code, and I'll put a link in here so you can check it out. So let's take a look at Crosstab and when it's going to be used. First thing that I'll do is I was import pandas as pd, and then here's the difference between Crosstab and pivot table. A pivot table is going to take a data frame and then pivot your data for you. However, Crosstab is mostly used when you have a list of items or an array of items and you want to pivot that itself. What Pandas is going to do on the back end is turn those lists into a data frame and then run pivot table. So let's take a look here. What I've done is I've inputted 3 lists, one for restaurant names, one for purchase type, and one for price. And then I've simply printed out those lists to see what they look like. And you can see here that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items in all 3 of my lists. Okay? Now let's do a simple crosstab exercise. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call pandas.Crosstab, and I'm going to specify an index. Now this is what your rows are going to be. And keep in mind here that I actually encompassed my list within a list. And then I want my restaurant names to be my rows. And then I'm calling columns equals purchase type, which is also in a list. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. I'll run this, and as you can see, my rows are going to be my restaurant names from above, and my columns are going to be my distinct purchase types from above. So what I want you to note here is see the values that are in here. Because I did not specify certain values that I wanted Crosstab to aggregate on, it just simply counted the frequency at which that intersection happened, which in English, that means there was 2 combinations between 5C, which stands for 500 Club, and drink. So we look up at our lists up here, and we can see that we have 5C right here, 5C right here, and we have drink, and we have drink. So it makes sense. But say, for example, you didn't want to count just the frequency of your intersections, but you wanted to actually see an aggregate function on top of it. Well, all you need to do is just pass the values that you want to do and specify an aggregate function. So again, I'll call pandas.Crosstab, specify my rows, specify my columns, and then in this case, I'm going to specify my values that I want. Now, because I only have 3 lists of data up here, and one of them is numerical, and I'm using the other 2, it's pretty obvious which one I want. However, if you had 50 different columns or 50 different lists, then you'd want to specify. So I'm going to specify values equals price, and I'm going to specify an aggregate function or an ag function. And this means, what do you want me to do with the array, or how do you want me to aggregate your data at the end of it? And what I'm going to say here is I want you to sum it up. I'll run this, and what we get here, zoom in just a little bit, what we get is my rows again, my food and drink intersections, and actually the sum of the data that was there beforehand. So for example, this 5C and drink intersection, let's go up to the top here. Let's look for 5C. Here's the drink intersection, and you can see it's 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th item there. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4th item. And then it's also the last item. So we have 10 plus 18. That's going to be 28. And as you can see here, we get 28 that's summed up for that intersection there. And finally, let's look at more parameters that Crosstab takes. So it actually takes a fair amount of parameters, which is awesome. And so here, these first 3 we have done. In this ag func, I'm actually going to pass a lambda function. So this is going to be a custom one. And what I'm simply going to do is I'm just going to square the sum of the resulting data. So it's nothing fancy here, just going to square it. I'm going to call my row names restaurants. I'm going to call my column names food types. And here's an interesting one. I'm going to call margins equals true. And what that means is it's actually going to give us subtotals for our rows and our columns. And then I'm going to give my margin names a title. I'm just going to call it totals. I'll go ahead and run this. And as you can see, our values is the square of the sum of the array that was there beforehand. And it's actually added a subtotal column for us. So here it is on the rows, here it is on the columns, and here it is in total and aggregate. Now that is Pandas Crosstab.